Okay, everyone. I think we've got pretty much everyone in. We've got a little number down the bottom that's fluctuating around 50, and maybe some people are dropping out with ropey connections, but I think we'll get underway. For those who don't know me, my name's Siobhan Lavelle, and I'm a member of the ASHA Executive. So I would like to welcome you to tonight's seminar, which is part of the online ASHA seminar series for 2024. I'd also like to note and acknowledge that I'm calling in from the land of the Darug and Gundungurra people, and ASHA acknowledges the traditional owners of country and recognises their continuing connection to land, sea, sky, water and community. Recognising where we stand is but one of many acts acknowledging past injustices and committing to acts of reconciliation. So we pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, to other First Nations peoples on the lands on which we meet this evening, and to elders past and present. And tonight we're very fortunate to have as our seminar presenter Dr. Jennifer Jones-Travers. And I know you all read the outline of her seminar and probably her qualifications and experience while you were grabbing your tickets on the ASHA booking site. But Jennifer is the Director of Latitude Heritage, which is based in Tasmania, and she has worked for over 20 years in archaeology and heritage management as an archaeologist, an excavation director, an artefact analyst and a researcher. She's also the current member with expertise in archaeology on the Tasmanian Heritage Council. She's the chair of its archaeological, how can I not say that word, advisory panel, and a member of its works and registration committees. And those of you who follow the media would have seen some quite fascinating articles about the discoveries that Jen is going to speak with us about tonight in her paper titled A Rat's Nest at its Finest, Early Colonial Textiles and Footwear from Anglesea Barracks at Nipaluna, Hobart. So over to you, Jen.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Siobhan. And yeah, thanks to everyone for joining us today. So I will admit to start this talk, the title is a lie. This is not a rat's nest. What we're looking at today has entirely everything to do with human activity, but I was hoping to maybe conjure in everyone's minds the idea of a rat's nest, because I don't know about you, but as an archaeologist, they're always so interesting to find this kind of tangle of usually, textiles and hair and bits of like paper scraps and things like that. And this collection was really amazing because it actually incorporated a lot of those things with, relatively good levels of preservation. Oh, come on. Oh my goodness. There we go. Okay, so to kind of set the scene for some of the things that we'll talk about today, I've decided to put up a couple of images of sort of colonial Australian costume. So I think, as archaeologists, we have the premise that, in many situations, and especially in places like penal colonies, as we've studied them, clothing is used to classify and identify, convicts, military personnel, and free settlers. And so more than that, the clothing cut and color, as well as probably quality, gives an ability to differentiate further within those groups. So you can look at the identification of a convict's class, a soldier's rank and regiment, and maybe a free settler's occupation. So, I mean, I would say we do this every day. We can tell by what people are wearing, their class, their gender, how they, associate with that and what they do. You get those little hints, right, through material culture. If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't probably be studying artifacts as much as we do. So during the transportation period, the British government was responsible for supplying dress to a lot of Australia, like colonial Australia's inhabitants, including convicts, civil and military officials, some settlers, and, in the case of Tasmanian, Aboriginal people, so those, captured and forcibly incarcerated at places like Wibelina and Putalina, Oyster Cove. The supply of clothing from the British colonial government to Australia was haphazard, and shortages and inadequacies plagued the settlements, making it actually really difficult to regulate appearance in accordance with these classifications that they'd set up. That I think, we all visit the tourist sites and see, the very clear color differentiations and cuts of clothing meant to kind of identify where people were, the who's who in colonial society, especially, among the convicts and things like that. So Nipaluna, Hobart is noted as having particularly irregular issues of clothing arriving from the British government. So while, whatever they did receive, however, in terms of clothing and footwear, was subject to extremely harsh living conditions, resulting then as well in considerable wear and tear. And so this affected the appearance and well-being of transportees and military personnel, offering relatively little protection from sun or rain during hard labor. And so in this instance, specifically at Anglesea Barracks, we're looking at clothing that we think has come to be assigned to, members of the military and their families. But it's interesting because there's this shared experience of garments and footwear being provided from the government, from sort of a centralized source. And there's a lot of similarities that you might not expect, at least I didn't. So in places like Tasmania and New South Wales, convicts especially suffered the most, from inadequate clothing, even to the point where there was occasionally a threat of rebellion, which was really interesting. It was actually so concerning that in 1920, Governor Lachlan Macquarie warned the secretary for the colonies that if garments didn't arrive soon, that there would be alarming consequences and possibly like a convict uprising as a result of that shortage. So I just thought as a really fun, like kind of getting the idea. So the image above is from New South Wales, not Tasmania. And this is from 1932. So this is kind of at the time of or a bit after the features that we're looking at Anglesea Barracks. So the convicts are clothed, yes, an improvement, that's pretty good. But you'll notice that a couple of them actually aren't wearing shoes. If you zoom into the photo, or if you have a look here, these two fellows here, digging, they don't actually have any footwear on. So, they're cutting stone for retaining walls in the Blue Mountains. So, you can kind of only imagine how difficult, how difficult that would be. That would be awful. So in the early years of the colonies, convicts and free working class settlers, some of them anyways, were issued with government clothing, basic loose garments described as slops, based on a Dutch word for seamen's wide breeches. These were effectively drab working class clothing. Similar clothing was also issued to military personnel not on active duty. So the finds, we're about to talk about, at the time, garments were hard enough to find, early in the transportation period for the people trying to wear them. But even fewer have survived in museum collections and archaeological assemblages, leaving sort of limited tangible evidence of this aspect of Australian history. So we have the clothing of upper and even middle class. They're a bit better documented in portraits and other artworks, as well as some museum collections. But the uniforms of everyday laborers, convicts, servers, and soldiers is not to the same degree, at least, based on the research that I've done across, the literature to date. So a collection of artifacts from under the second Soldier Barracks at Anglesea Barracks, Nipaluna, Hobart, gives a bit of insight into this class of material culture. So Anglesea Barracks is the oldest continuously operating military site in Australia. To kind of set the scene, being this beautiful sweeping panoramic image of Hobarton around 1833. So you get a view of the settlement looking towards Kanani, Mount Wellington, from Timtimili Manania, the River Derwent. So going back to 1811, Governor Lachlan Macquarie arrived in 1811, that dates to inspect the settlement in Van Diemen's Land and described the soldiers basically as drunken gambling womanizers, just to paraphrase. Oh, so that must be working. So he moved them from their accommodation at the center of what would have been a pretty lively maritime merchant town there, where the first arrow is, and made a proclamation that a new barracks be constructed at the top of the hill where the second arrows appeared. So it was meant to ensure that the soldiers weren't mixing with unruly convicts or others of ill repute. And so here's just a quick print showing that Anglesea Barracks established at the top of Barrack Hill on Davy Street. The first building having been finished in 1815. So the second Soldier Barracks, source of the artifact collection we'll be discussing, is marked with the red arrow, and it's seen just there in the image overlooking the parade ground as it was. And here is the layout of the building, and I've just marked out where the artifacts came from. And not shown in this image is the fact that we had to go under the floor. Okay, I guess the name probably gave that away, but surprise! So the project entirely started with an unexpected find under what is now known as the officers' mess. So a tradesman brought the Department of Defense's Environment and Sustainability Manager, Dr. Kate Hibbert, a pile of leather boots from under the building and asked if they might be important. So basically that sort of started the process of looking at some of the artifacts that were pulled out and establishing their age and significance and things like that. And the assemblage was, found to be highly significant for its historical and research values as well as its rarity. The site, however, was at risk of ingress by people moving in and out of the space. Like you can see, there's the access ladder, there's a hole punched in the wall, and there's a whole tangle of services under there. And so people, sort of moving in and out of the space constantly. It had been fossicked previously by, trainee officers and things like that. A heap of artifacts pulled out in the 1970s during various phases of works in the building. And heaven forbid, imagine you've got a slew of artifacts, early artifacts of leather and textile across the surface, being crushed across a rubble deposit. If one of those sewage pipes or water pipes goes, it's going to be a pretty awful mess, and really, really affect, really affect whatever's left of any sort of associated artifact deposit. So this is our beautiful access point. So we found just over 1,500 artifacts underneath this building. So the room is about 6 meters by 8 meters in size, this underfloor space. And we basically collected the artifacts on a 2 by 2 meter grid pattern that we established across it. We collect the artifacts, and then we protected it with geofabric and bucketed in sand by hand, basically. So that way now, if there is an emergency and people have to access the site, there isn't the crushing and trampling across the rubble. And in case any of the pipes does break and people need to go in there, there's a bit of a buffer so they're not just destroying things, or if there is liquid that goes in, like it's not just absolutely splashing across and destroying everything instantly. Here are some lovely photos of the underside. So there's quite a deposit of rubble. There's a series of sort of mounds and depressions likely to do with other phases of work. And you can see some of the services, in the underfloor space that we were working around. And there's sort of a mound of rubble and some sort of larger boulders that we were working around. So these were kind of the working conditions. It's entirely as glamorous as it looks. And yeah, that's where we spend a bit of time getting really good at crawling around. So in terms of what we found, so here is the plan of the site in the 2 by 2 meter squares, just sort of showing, it's sort of like a basic hotspot map, just kind of showing where we found the largest concentrations of artifacts. This is where we sort of came in from the cellar. And, we sort of found that things were being sort of concentrated a little bit more towards this end of the site. And a lot of it seemed to be focused around some of these rubble piles and, where areas that they'd excavated for later modifications to the building. So leading to the question, were these things that had been turned up as they'd excavated, like had they been covered previously, or were they finds that were scattered on the surface and modified later? And that's something we'll sort of look at in a moment. But, what we're finding is, obviously military clothing. We're in a military barracks. So here are a couple of examples of sort of the classic red coats. So the one on the right, you can see is actually lined with a bit of a cotton batting. So we're not sure if that has to do with either, associated with use in battle or just keeping warm in the winter. But you can see these pieces, like they've been unpicked at the seams. So have a look for that in the photos coming up with the artifacts. That's a common trend, is that things are, obviously decaying, but they're also picked apart at the seam and they're being mended multiple times. Oh, here's another piece. I'm so sorry. It has a bit of green trim from one of the other regiments. And we did find a number of pieces that represented a variety of the regiments within Anglesea Barracks. So we found the red military coats that had dark green, beige, and yellow facing, and we can actually tie those to different groups of soldiers that were there. And then we're also finding things like, black wool trousers that have the red piping. There's a bit of a suspender or a fixture to actually, tie equipment together. That's sort of that leather brace with numbers sort of stamped on it that, had something to do with probably its use or who it was assigned to. And here are some epaulets that were actually unstitched and pieces, the faced pieces from some of the military jackets, just to give you an idea of the bits and pieces that we found. When you think with this collection specifically, we had nearly 1,500 artifacts. About a third of it was textiles, which was really interesting. Again, you don't usually get that level of organic preservation. Other organics represented about another 45% of the collection. So organic preservation in this space was really high. And again, it gives you this interesting sort of fine-grained detail in textiles that we don't usually get if they've been preserved solely because they're wet, on sort of waterlogged sites. Like, it's just interesting. You can see, it's like somebody stitched it a few days ago. if not, slightly worse for wear. Um, and there are, there's a collection of leather boots. So just we had a couple of types of boots, handmade with sort of timber pegs, as well as later timber pegs usually to fix the soles, as well as some instances there were iron nails used to affix them, and sort of in two different styles that are consistent with sort of early 19th century military boots. But they each feature different elements. So this is a boot that had a heel tap on it, for parading and marching, and also just improving the maintenance of the boots. As well as, it's interesting, it's actually tied with like a silk brocade ribbon. So it's beautiful kind of red and yellow patterned silk that obviously is not terribly easy to see when it's dusty and just recovered. But you can see this boot was worn until it had worn at least three, through three layers of the sole. Here's another example of a boot that we recovered. Similarly, you can actually see with this one, it does have the number 1808 marked on it. I don't know that that's a year, but it's just, it does have, again, manufacturer marks stamped into it. And you can see here the sole has actually fallen apart, and it looks like they've cut the edge of it, probably to mend it. So we've seen a fair bit of that in this collection. So just to give an idea of this, these are sort of the more intact boots that we found. And so we also found a number of garments in this fabric. And this is really interesting. Just in the literature, a lot of times this fabric is referred to as convict shirt fabric. So in general, though, the imperial government imported thousands of yards of this blue striped fabric to clothe its population. And instead of being used specifically for convicts, it likely comprised part of the generic slops clothing distributed across the population receiving rations, including clothing from the government. So, here we have a shirt collar and a cuff made of the same fabric, and then the body of a larger garment. And you can see there's variations in the thickness and the gauge of the striping evident in the piece. And it's interesting that the best sort of preserved examples of these types of shirts, are on display at places like Hyde Park Barracks. And so here's an example from, Hyde Park Barracks, just showing some of the consistencies with the garment pieces that we found at Anglesea Barracks. So one major difference is that a lot of the convict clothing pieces tended to have the initials of the relevant establishment and sort of a broad arrow or another sort of mark from the Board of Ordnance on them, but we haven't seen any of those marks at all in the, the clothing coming through this collection. And so the consistency in the material and style to convict clothing is, I think, really interesting in itself, and it speaks to the difficulties probably in visually differentiating the citizenry, again, by the cut and color of their clothing. If everybody's getting this, how do you tell the convicts and the soldiers and everyone else? Obviously the red jackets and things help, but when they're off duty and things like that. And the artifacts, I think, they start telling you stories. And I think this one, tells a very specific and very sad story. So all credit to Professor Hamish Maxwell Stewart, who tracked the biographic details by the name. So this was from a soldier named Thomas Lannon. You can see the name sort of stenciled a couple times on the collar that you're looking at here. So this is the front and back of the collar from a brown wool jacket. And then Dr. Kate Hibbard with the Department of Defense, she found the newspaper account of what happened with this piece. But effectively, Private Thomas Lannon, a laborer, tailor and soldier, was from County Mayo in Ireland. He enlisted in the British military in 1821 and formed part of the 63rd Regiment as a first flank grenadier. And you can see that there's actually an indication there that he was in that regiment and as a grenadier. He was stationed in Avoca, Van Diemen's Land from June 1832 and was having a drink at the Gray's Arm public house with some colleagues and was basically found lying drunk on the floor by two of the constables. So his colleagues basically tried to wake him up, like he's laying drunk in a pub and he's a soldier, needs to get back, to the barracks. And he warned that he would, to quote, stick the first of them that came nigh when they tried to rouse him. And that's how he killed his colleague, Private McCabe, who he drunkenly stabbed with a clasp knife. So realizing his error, Lannon asked his colleagues to shoot him on the spot. There was no malice between them before that, and Lannon had excellent character reviews by others, his officers, but he was still found guilty of manslaughter, instead of murder. And so this collar was likely torn publicly from his jacket as part of his dishonorable discharge. So, there's this very evocative event. This is somebody's life, and this is a piece of clothing that was, probably taken off of them at some point after their life, probably changed pretty dramatically. Other stories that we start to learn from the artifacts tell us there were women and children at the barracks, with the soldiers and their families. So ordinary soldiers had to be given permission to marry, and the colonel of the regiment might give 12 soldiers in a company, so of 100 men, permission to marry on the regiment. And so that meant that basically the wives and any children would be provided with rations at no extra cost. If they were married on the regiment, soldiers' wives were expected to do the washing and the sewing for the soldiers to offset the cost of their rations. So in October 1816, the military establishment at Hobart included 66 men, but also 6 women and 16 children. And so these women and children are visible in the artifact assemblage from the barracks in a few of these specialized pieces of clothing. So we have here part of a woman's shoe or boot, most likely just given the size. It could be a teenager or a younger child. There's also this really lovely bit of sort of a muslin that's got this embroidery on it with this pink star pattern and some red, sort of red patterned fabric as well. It's not to say they had to be worn by women, but there's an indication that they were on the barracks. This shoe sort of is a hand sewn leather shoe. By the size of it, it would fit a child about 3 to 4 years of age by today's standards. And then on the right is a garment, again, made from what we normally is sort of referred to as the convict shirt fabric. It's a garment made from that fabric. It's actually like a baby's gown. So you can see it's got a drawstring neck and sort of flared sleeves, and it's sort of this open gown made of that same fabric. And so I don't know, you sort of ask questions like, in this period, like in the kind of earlier days of colonial Van Diemen's Land or Australia, what did working class children's clothing look like? It's so rare that, some of the authors I've looked at have postulated that maybe they were just dressed in adult slops and they just, wrapped it up a heap so that it sort of fit them. And so, it makes it tough to say, like, was this garment, for a special event or occasion? Was it just, they had some spare fabric to make specific clothing for a child? But it's just, so few examples of this type of clothing have survived that it just really gives you no baseline. But it's really interesting to see, and I think something to ask a lot of questions about. And some pieces that we find tell other types of stories. So the shirt on the left, you've got a couple of pieces of mismatched button, which is a bit less interesting than the piece on the right. That it doesn't really show up quite right, but that is stained with blood. And it looks like it's been cut through the center and then reattached to either modify the sleeve length or do something else. And then, as with a lot of the other garments that we're seeing, it's been stitched in other places by something that looks like, it could be like bits of rope fiber or jute, or it could even be oakum. Like we know that they were picking oakum in the military prison at Anglesea Barracks. So there's this interesting reuse of all these other things just to kind of piece things together so that they would sort of keep people clothed effectively. And so we also found a few pieces of stockings, generally just absolute like wool stockings, absolutely tattered beyond recognition. This one similarly has, possible blood stains throughout it. And you can see there's a lovely bit of darning that someone's done, just near the toe of it there. But just the state of wear on the clothing, does tell you that people are absolutely using like every tiny piece of what they have and making do with what's around. And that kind of brings to maybe one of those, I don't know, one of the many questions I guess that this fund has brought up. And I just, just things that, we can look at or think about, or, people might consider doing more research on. But like we read about resource shortages and the lack of things like food and clothing. And I feel like a find like the one at Anglesea Barracks makes it really tangible and sort of frames it in a way that sometimes feels, odd to grasp, maybe coming from such a consumeristic era where you can buy $3 t-shirts and everything's readily available. But, if you look at this piece of clothing here, there's brown wool fabric patched with a piece of black wool fabric that's made of 2 pieces of wool fabric patched together, all sewn together, again, using like rope fiber or, oakum that's been picked out and wound into a bit of a twine. And that itself has been cut into a big rectangular piece, possibly to use to mend another piece of clothing. And that's just, evidence of somebody really using like whatever is at hand to keep people from running around naked and rioting. And I just wonder, this leads to a couple of questions, in a colony, right, where your rank and your status is meant to be expressed by clothing in so many instances, would these types of things instill the kind of the the fear and confidence in the citizenry as they're marching about, with bits and pieces kind of half picked together. In a lot of times when they're off duty, possibly being nearly indistinguishable from the convicts. Like, what is missing from the I want to say these very glamorous photos. They're not. I know it's like old tattered pieces of clothing. For archaeology, I feel like it's relatively glamorous. But what we found in the collection, it's hundreds of pieces of scraps of fabric and leather. And you can see it where they've taken them and they've cut them apart into pieces to get them ready to use again. And so this is absolutely making use of like every last scrap and piece of these, bits of textile and leather until there's nothing left, possibly, trying to pull it together to get another piece of clothing ready to put on someone else, basically as part of their rations. Um, and so, yeah, the leather shoes and boots, like we're seeing the soles mended and remended at least 4 or 5 times, patches on patches. And then after that's done, like after they've gotten the very last they can out of it, they've taken it, they've sheared the leather, just above the sole, to take those pieces to then attach to other boots that need mending. And we see that in the artifacts from this collection, or they're unpicking them to actually, separate the pieces of leather that were there. And so, finding all of these unusual, very worn and very deconstructed pieces of artifacts, looks, it looks, I would say that they provide evidence of a cobbler and a tailor working likely out of a quartermaster store that might have been, on the site of where the second barracks was eventually built. Just given the age of the artifacts, they're pretty consistently dating to the earlier periods of the 19th century. Was there a small structure here that was demolished before they built, the new soldier barracks? But even if that's not the case, there are people there, effectively working to make things to help people get by. So I guess, yeah, there you go. There's another boot absolutely mended to within an nth of its life. So yeah, I guess, the question being like, is this a really good example of resource shortage? And again, there are resource shortages through all different periods of time, but, these are the people who, realistically, like if this is the resource shortage, the military is facing, right? Like these are the clothing bits and pieces that are coming through that they're wearing and fixing to then send out again. What is it like for the unfree population? So if these are the people who'd be getting probably, the pick of the goods, what is going out to the convicts and the incarcerated Aboriginal people and, women and children and things like that? Like I just, again, maybe more questions than answers, but I think it's, possibly a really interesting insight into a phase of history that, again, we don't hear about the working classes, quite as much, except through the lens of the, upper classes or middle classes. And yeah, it was just an interesting thing here. So yeah, was the practice of trying to differentiate people by clothing as successful as the people who came up with the theories about it actually intended? Like I would suggest, at least at this time period, it doesn't look to be quite the case. So further directions. So obviously, this project came up as an unexpected find. So as you can imagine, there's not endless resources to go through everything in detail. I feel like there are so many further directions. If there's any students who need a research topic, this would be, there's just amazing things to look at with this collection. So, one example is we're finding evidence of some worked wallaby skins. And, we know that in 1822, there was actually a decree specifically forbidding Hobart prisoners and ticket of leave men from wearing items made of skin, because at that time, convicts who could afford it, they purchased ordinary clothing or wore jackets, caps, and trousers made of kangaroo skin that they obtained from stockkeepers. And so this looks to be a wallaby skin with most of the subcutaneous tissue and a lot of the hair scraped away. And so, is this somebody making clothing, on the side as something else to do? Are they trying to make use of a locally available resource, to help with their work in kind of patching and mending garments and things like that? Another question is, what is this funny patch? Because there's this really odd patch on the edge of this garment, and there's no associated tear or weakness in it. So, is it for, I don't know, my question was, are people hiding things in their clothing? And, I was interested because we found a few of those patches that really don't make sense. The tears and things are left open, and the areas that seem to be perfectly intact have these little pockets hidden in them, hand stitched onto them. And then, sort of the next question with this collection is, you know, what other uses are they making of the fabrics? So, there are a number of these pieces that are cut into consistently sized rectangles. Some look like they've been used maybe to pack wounds, like if they're used for medical purposes. Some look like they've been inside gun barrels for cleaning guns. Like, are they ragging them, getting things ready for use in mending other garments? Or are they just using them for whatever purpose they might be able to apply these last scraps to? So there are a lot of, really, I guess, other questions that you could try to answer with this collection. Um, so yeah, if anybody is interested, please let me know if there's anything anyone wants to look at in the future. Um, yeah, I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm very jet lagged, and hopefully that made sense. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Um, does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry, speaking into the void is so odd. I'm sorry, Siobhan.
That's
It's
okay, Jen. We're all still here. Thank you very much. That was great.
thank you.
If people do have questions, they can either put them in the group chat, or you could raise your hand and unmute yourself. And if you raise your hand, I'll try and kind of scan the people and call you, I guess. Meg?
Hey, Jennifer. Can you hear me?
I can,
Yes.
yes, thank
Great.
you.
Okay. Yeah, that was really great. Thank you so much. So I am doing my PhD looking at Fremantle Prison underfloor deposits at the moment. And
Amazing.
yeah, we found a similar huge quantity of fabric and, scraps and bits and pieces that
Yeah,
sort of don't seem to have an immediate purpose. But I'm really interested in like the way that underfloor sites form. And I
yeah.
apologize if you touched on this earlier, but have you thought about like caching and how these objects got under the floorboards and how that might be in relation to resource use?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, one thing that I'm not sure, and I'm so sorry, I did mean to touch on it. I've gotten as far as thinking that there's a quartermaster and a tailor, just because the one thing that it would have been great to take photos of is actually the exact snippets. Like they've almost made patches and pieces out of the leather and the clothing. So
Oh,
I do think that there was a purpose to these objects being there. But
mhm.
inside of the building, there's a considerable rubble collapse. There's almost like a brick rubble mound at the center. That's sort of a similar sort of the early bricks that are, oh, just early handmade bricks basically. And so I was wondering if there was a chance that there actually was a structure there that they've knocked over, and they've done other works to the building since then. You can see there's some excavations. I wonder if it's pieces that were pulled up and around from an abandoned structure. Just because I
Mm,
can't think of any other reason that you'd have these garments on the surface. And I should have included. I have a photo from the 1970s. When they did that round of renovations, they pulled out a heap of nearly intact, like large, kind of still tattered like pieces of uniforms and things. But
oh, wow,
there was a
okay.
much larger collection. And
Mm,
I think, at that period too, it was a playground for new officers to kind of go and see what they could find under there. So these are really the last bits and pieces. But no, I'm honestly, I'm with you, Meg. How exactly they got there, I'm thinking earlier site, and that then it's been mixed around when
mm,
they did an extension in the 1930s.
mhm.
And you can see like there's some other structural elements that are later underneath that space, and you can see there's like excavation around the edges there, and that sort of corresponds with where most of the artifacts are coming from.
Yeah.
But the prison, and the thing is, like, they're officers, and you'd probably get caching and resource hoarding definitely to some degree, but it's a massive open space as opposed to a cell where
Mm,
you'd have, your kind of own concentration. Like if you lifted a floorboard, it's a massive, it'd be everybody doing it across a massive like 32 square meter space. So it's
yeah,
um
very
yeah, it's
interesting.
crazy. No, but yeah, I'd love to talk about yours because I'm just looking at this collection. I just felt like one of the biggest things was possibly again the things that the military are getting and the convicts are getting, and there's probably a lot more overlap. And I just you try to
Mm,
imagine that society where everybody's imagined this amazing. There's that convict in their black and white magpie suit, and that person over there in yellow.
yeah,
That's that person who's that red guy's in charge, and you're like, no, like they're all wearing rags and their shoes are falling
yeah,
off, and half the soldiers are wearing the same things as the convicts anyways. Like it's crazy. So yeah,
yeah,
I'm so sorry. It's just it
yeah.
it was yeah.
Would love to chat sometime about it.
I'd love
Thank you
that,
so
Meg.
much.
Absolutely. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, I'll call Robsel, who I know is actually Robin Stocks because I can see her. And here's a lesson to everyone. If you're in a Zoom meeting and you've got a name like 6627, we don't know who you are. But Robin, go ahead.
Thanks a lot. I've had this moniker, well, for 20 years. Hi, Jennifer. That was very interesting. Yes, having experience in some of this sort of stuff from many sites, were a couple come to mind. We, Case in Low, previous employer, dug a mid-19th century well at the Rocks called King George.
Oh,
and
amazing.
Full of leather from a shoemaker, a cobbler, and everything was repaired, everything again and again and again. And stuff. So I can share with you, I can send you that.
That would be amazing.
Report, yes. So, and we get this in many sites where you get constant repair, you get clump soles where they cut across the bottom and do it again, and the heel and the toe and so on. So so it's good to see there, and these were low class things. These were not got nothing to do with cost or anything.
No.
The other thing is the patching and the rags. One, although it's a male barracks and stuff, you did have the female stuff. When we dug North Parramatta, to do with the Parramatta girls thing, we have a lot of hidden stuff and things underfloor in relation to girls and into relation to undergarments and for sanitary purposes. And they cut
as soon as you said that,
and they have everything. So if you're interested in that, I could, we can talk about that.
I would love that, Robin. Thank you so much. Because I kept finding blood and bits and pieces, and I was like, well, it's the military, but also, it's one of those. Thank you so much.
It could be injury. It sounds like injuries a lot for your stuff, but you do get that rectangle thing.
Oh, that's so. Thank you so much, Robin. I went through the Braille literature as much as I could to kind of tie something together, and I probably should just called you. Thank you.
No. Well, get in contact, and I'll contact you actually, because my address.
Amazing.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, Richard Morrison.
Hello.
Hello.
I had the same thought about that object with blood on it. It did occur to me that it might be a sanitary product, given that you had wives there and children of what age. I also was thinking about the source of the convict material, which might be, as you say, from some general government store. But I'm mindful of something else that I did some work on the military jail there in the late 80s, did the conservation management plan there. And we didn't do any underfloor investigations as part of that. But something that came out in my examination of the records was that this had a relationship to the design of the military jail and the way they used it. There was a big concern that soldiers in doing their punishments should not be exposed to public ridicule. It would bring the regiments into disrepute. So they didn't do a lot of work in the town. They did it in an exercise yard, moving, I don't know whether you've heard of shot drill, but using piles of shot in a gridded area, moving it sequentially from one square to another. A nasty punishment in a way, but it also meant that the punishment was internal to the barracks. Now, the point of me mentioning that at all was that I think there would be a stigma associated with convict clothes. Now, it might have been that some of the wives, or all of them, may have had a convict past, because women were in short supply.
Of course.
So the women from the female factory or wherever were, some of them were convicts or ex-convicts. So some of the material may have come from the women, but as you say, it may have come from a convict store. I had something else to say and I've completely forgotten it, but anyway, there you go. Well, good work so far.
No, thank you. That's amazing. I will look into that. Thank you so much.
That's right.
Jen, I'm not sure if you can see the chat, but there's a question there from Julia Carmichael, who's still in the meeting.
I'm so sorry.
Julia, do you want to ask your question?
No, I'm good, thanks. I've got it in
Oh, the military buttons. Julia, there were four. There were four military buttons.
Oh, cool.
From the, oh gosh, I think it was the 99th Regiment. I'm so sorry because I'm online. I can't pull up the report at the moment. But yeah, there was a handful, but not that many. I think they indicated that those might have been the types of treasures that young officers enjoyed as they were playing under there. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep.
I think Richard has remembered his other
I
question.
have. Yeah, thank you. Yes, the other thing was vis-a-vis your comment about some of the material may have come from a pre-existing use of the site or the building. It occurred to me that it's unlikely that the soldiers built their barracks. So convicts may well have been on the site whenever a building was to be constructed.
Yeah.
So there might be another source of convict clothing through that.
Like bits and pieces. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's, yeah.
Jen, there's another question in the chat from Angie McGowan. I don't know if you can see that one.
I can see that. So there's an inquest into the lack of small size shoes for female convicts in 1849. The visiting magistrate complained about the women suffering winter sickness because they went barefoot. Do you know about later provision of leather shoes in the Van Diemen's Land colony? I don't, Angie. Like, it sounds like it was honestly
not Angie,
a bit of
it's Eleanor Casella.
Oh, Elle, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Elle. It has Angie's names in the chat. I have not. Sorry. Yeah, no, I've not heard specifically about the later provision, but it sounds like it's pretty hit and miss. And again, it sounds like, convicts would have got the not the best of it. So, if they're kind of at, yeah, I don't know. Sorry.
Okay, I've just got to check the other screen in case I'm missing someone. I don't see any other questions. I had one, Jen, noting what you said about, it was an unexpected find and then the kind of process had to engage and you had to kind of recover what you could and try and protect it for the future.
Yeah.
I just wondered, with a site like that, has this prompted any kind of process to try and look at future archaeological management or policies? I mean, I get the fact that this was probably not really well known, but those stories of, there used to be kind of people who would go in there and see what they could find. Like, there's a lot of historic sites that have those earlier phases of the plumber or someone finds stuff, or there's a bottle dump or whatever. But has it prompted any thought about the significance of archaeology elsewhere on the site and maybe going forward how to manage that, or doing some kind of further assessment of some kind?
Yeah. I think, look, Shimon, not that I know of, like, I would say, look, at the very least, I would say that it was a case of an unexpected find policy implemented really correctly. So I think hopefully, if anything, it reinforces the importance of doing that. It's that thing, the fellow who was under there did the right thing by telling someone that there was something there, and they've, called someone in to have a look at it. But I'm not sure, what else has maybe changed. I know that.
Do you want me to answer that, Jen? Or should I not?
Please do.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm the person who was sitting in my office on a normal Tuesday when somebody walked in with a 200-year-old boot. So I help manage the barracks. Yeah, absolutely, Siobhan. We already have, as Jen mentioned, under our heritage management, we have an unexpected finds protocol in place. We have a bunch of processes if we're going to do work that may encounter or disturb archaeological sites. And specifically for that site, we have controls on anybody going into that space, that they know what's there and that what they do under there is managed before they go under. We're talking about what we do into the future, specifically with that site now as well.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking of the broader context of it as a precinct that obviously has, this archaeological layer. But thanks, Kate. I mean, I certainly agree that the find was reported and it let, other appropriate processes happen. So that's a good outcome. There is a question from Abby Cryhall in the chat, Jen, which is, was there any conservation treatment for these artefacts?
Absolutely. So the artifacts as they came out, Abby, were actually in like really good condition. I know it's odd to say, but it's sort of like you've gone to your closet and pulled them out. The Army Museum of Tasmania, who has, you know, custodianship of the objects, they have a couple of conservators, like trained conservators on staff, or as volunteers on staff, and they had a look at everything, and realistically, you know, a bit of the soil's been brushed off, but they're all currently in archival bags and sort of Kevlar sleeves and things like that. So the Army Museum have, you know, really good kind of packaging and conservation materials. It's, who am I kidding? It's like the Rolls Royce of archaeological spaces, and definitely in the Hobart region. It's pretty amazing. It's climate controlled and everything else. So they actually came out looking like really stable, Abby. Like they're kind of almost it was very dry. They're almost mummified. Like they're yeah, amazing. Like just yeah, they're very stable as they came out, which is good. And yeah, they had a good look at them though. I hope that helps.
I can't see any further questions, so I guess I give people a last chance if they want to raise their hand or pop something in the chat. Should I do a countdown? I think you've wowed everyone, Jen, so they're just kind of trying to absorb the images and the content. If there are no further questions, I would like to thank Dr. Jennifer Jones-Travers very much for agreeing to do this seminar for us. She's calling in from the other side of the world, which is very generous of her in giving her time and interacting with us in strange time zones. So we're very grateful for that. And she's also done it, as she mentioned, whilst jet lagged. So this is a huge commitment for ASHA, and we're very grateful. And thank you very much, Jen. These seminars are recorded and they do get uploaded eventually to the ASHA webpage. So if you have friends who you know should have actually been at this seminar because they would have seen fascinating things, it will be accessible further down the track. And on behalf of ASHA, as well as thanking Jen, I would like to thank all of you for attending. We run these seminars for our membership, and we also, they're free so that other people who might be interested in a topic can join. But if you're not an ASHA member, I encourage you to think about it. And everyone is doing little virtual rounds of applause for Jen. So thank you very much. And last chance for a final question, but I don't see any. So I think your homework for us is done. Jen, thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. It was, yeah, thank you. And yeah, please hit me up if you have any other questions that come to you at 2 in the morning or something. Please do.
She'll still be awake because she's in another time zone.
I'll still be awake because yeah, I'm on the other side. So yeah, thank you so much. Thanks all.